Well, I am super excited to visit about this incredible book series that you have just released. It is weighty, and it is almost overwhelming in the amount of information presented in this series. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to release this series now? I know that some folks might have seen your first series many years ago.
Right.
I don't know if that's something you want to talk about, but
no, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah,
Partly
yeah.
to say, this replaces that. Please, for God's sake, give me, not you, but everybody, please. Okay, are you ready for this? I'm asking a favor. Give me a space to have learned something. I produced Principles of Conformation Analysis, which is still for sale through the Aquis Magazine organ that does that. And I still work for Aquis Magazine. I've worked for them since 1984. And they're not talking about letting me go. That company has been sold and resold and resold, is currently owned by Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., and I still work with my same editor, Lori Prince, who is just an angel, and she and I have gotten along beautifully for many, total understanding between us for years. So I'm very happy to contribute for them, and they call me a consulting editor, which is nice. So yeah, I did that for them, but time went on. Those were produced in the first one came out in 1986. That's what, 35 years ago, 37 years ago. So I can't add, but I think that's about right. So there's nothing in there. All the stuff about the ring of muscles is in there. A lot of the stuff about the planes of assessment technique for figuring out whether the front or back legs are correctly articulated. In other words, viewing them as what they really are, is three-dimensional objects, is in the old books. But the stuff on straightness is not. And, this was a discovery that Ray Hunt helped me make and reinforced by Tom. But it was Ray and me in dialogue that, he didn't have the biology. But anytime I taught him some biology, he was the most, just exactly like the guy with the Olympic team. Best student you ever had. All ears. So I've told this story for you, Emily, in Eclectic Horseman. One of the first articles I did, I think the very first one that I did for you, had to do with twirling the head. Mm-hmm. And when I showed that, I happened to have a skeleton in my trunk. Okay, so I'm crazy. So I go around with skeletons in my trunk. Good thing I don't get rear-ended. That would be quite the forensic problem, I'm sure. But so I had a skeleton of a horse in the trunk, and I was riding down in 29 Palms with Ray, and we all ate lunch. So we all sat down at these picnic tables, and I was sitting right across from Ray. Somebody asked me about twirling the head, and I said, well, if you want to see, I'll go get the atlas axis and the skull, and I'll let you manipulate the bones. I got them right here, just by chance. So I went and got them, and I showed this guy that had asked me, and then I showed Ray, and I let him manipulate them. His eyebrows went up so far, I thought they were going to tip his hat off. Why? Because this had deep, instant, he knew exactly what it meant. And what it was the explanation for something that he had found purely by feel. And see, this raises an important point. You can learn horsemanship without ever reading a book, certainly without going to any college. All that stuff about getting an equestrian, do I get 6 letters a week on this from some girl, that wants to, her parents want her to go to school and she doesn't want to do nothing but horses. So they compromise and think they're going to get an equestrian degree. Well, fine, maybe that suits some purposes, but you don't need that. You can make it without what Bill Steinkraus says, without any reading. But you'd get there quicker if you did read. But Ray just was not a particularly adept reader. I think most people never realize that he's just dyslexic as all get out. I'm left-handed. He is left-handed too. I understood perfectly. I mean, he's so able to switch sides. That's typical of left-handed people. Because do you ever try to open a door with a key with your left hand? No can
Yeah.
do it. Or even use a pair of pliers, which looks like it could be used with either hand, but it's or scissors. Okay, you really need to be ambidextrous, and most of us become ambidextrous or had some tendency for it to begin with. And Ray was one of the most perfectly left-right-eyed people I ever saw in my life. And I had to smile because me too. It's like, okay, I got a teacher here that is like so excellent an example for me personally. So, but to get back to the main question, why the new books? Because I learned a bunch of stuff and I want to teach it to you. Plus, over the long haul of years, in the beginning, we solicited, goes back so far that I used to do conformation analysis on a Xerox machine. People would send me photographs in the mail, or they'd send them to Equus and then they'd forward them to me. There was no email. There was no computers. I didn't, it's a totally new world now. But back in the day, we did it all on paper, and I'd take them down to Kinko's copies and make an enlarged copy of probably a 5x7 photograph, and then make an ink tracing of the animal's image, mark the points on there, and then produce that as a line drawing using a drafting table.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. This is the old days. I got started in publishing myself because in high school, I was on the staff of the yearbook. That's how I got my start. And my first job was writing cut lines, which you would call figure captions.
Yep. High school newspaper. So yeah.
Okay, exactly. But back in the day, they were called cut lines. Why? Because they were literally cut. They were set into a wooden block with metal type slugs. And the trick was to get the caption to fit the space. So you counted spaces and letters, and that forced you to find another way to say it so you could get everybody's name in the allowable space or whatever you wanted to say that they were doing in that picture. So I was the cut line editor. And that's good training. I also do layout because I was besides teaching for public ed at KU, I was also the museum illustrator. So I was also the museum illustrator at Michigan as an undergraduate. That's how I got started. I had a teacher at Michigan who taught me, or at least pointed me to the techniques that would be appropriate and got me started using an old-fashioned camera lucida, which is a microscope that you put your specimen under the regular microscope lens, but the camera has an arm that goes out with a mirror so that you put your hand under the mirror, and then you look down the tube and you see a ghost image of your hand and your pencil over the specimen. And that allows you to make an exact tracing of tiny little specimens that back then there was no photography that could possibly get them.
Yeah.
Today, for $60, I can go buy a thing that plugs into my computer with a USB cable that'll take a picture of something the size of a pinhead and blow it up to the size of the screen. But that was not happening in the early days. So all those years we gathered photos. And so these three you call it a series. It's actually a 3-volume work or opus. The pictures that appear, there are over 500 of them if you count all 3 volumes, are the cream of the crop. And they go back, in some cases, well back into the 1970s, because it's still the best example of whatever conformation that was that I ever saw. So that's what's in the book, really good stuff. So you want to see bench knees? I got some doozies. You want to see ring bone? I got some doozies. And that's what is needed to teach it. You know, people send me pictures of their perfect horse, and it's like, maybe those will get printed, but probably not, because I'm not that interested in perfect horses. What I'm interested in is teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I want to teach you how to see, period, which is Tom Dorrance saying, observe, remember, and compare. Okay, it starts with observe. Okay, do you see it? Can you see it? I've had women are especially bad with this. And of course, I'm interested in kicking their butt, because they need to quit this. They need to find their courage. They need to be brave enough to own their own observations. And everybody, you know, you get occasionally a guy who's like this too, but it's mainly women. So I'll be teaching a conformation clinic live, and I've just showed them how to observe the hocks, and they've just noticed them for the first time in their life. And they've just seen them as they are for the first time, without a veneer or overlay or indoctrination from some wrong idea, but as they really are. And the woman will see it, and I see her see it. And she turns to me with this amazed look on her face, and she says, Dr. Deb, is that what I saw? Yeah, and I say, yeah, honey, it's what you saw. Of course it's what you saw. What you saw is what is valid. And so I'm here to help you see more accurately, or in more detail, or so that what you see has more meaning. It has, and that gets us to the other part, which is, and that was there in the old books too, form to function is what people call that. The new set of volumes makes that explicit. Principles, the title is Horse Conformation. The subtitle is Principles of Form and Function. So the way the book, each volume is structured in alternating chapters. First, there's a chapter that tells you how it works, what the structural components are, how they're hooked together, and when the horse moves, how does this work? So the horse as biomechanical machine. And then the next chapter, the very next chapter, will be one that has to do with the particular structures, which is conformation per se. But, you know, who cares that you realize a horse has hoofs unless you realize how they work? So I'm interested in teaching you how the horse works. And that, by the way, was the title of the very first magazine series I ever did in my life, which started in 1976 for a little teeny mag that was printed on newsprint. And it was called the Arabian Horse Express. And I know there are people watching this right now who still remember that. And I get letters from people that say, are you ever going to do a book? I still have the newsprint and it's turning yellow. I still have those articles. But that was when I realized that this was going to be needed.
The question that I want to ask is, and I'm guilty of this, because when we first started talking about the book, I thought, horse conformation, I'm not buying a horse anytime soon. I'm not competing. I'm not, why should I care? Why should I care about conformation?
Well, that's because of function. That's why. And that's the only reason anybody should care about it. Because why? You buying a horse just for looks? The only people that do that are doing what it's called hauler competition, and for which I have absolutely categorically zero respect. I'm totally not interested in that, and I think it's very hard on the horses, and not that they're hard on them as far as the work they're asking the animal to do or the grooming they subject it to, and I do mean subject. It isn't that. You couldn't go to the fairground and say, oh, these people are being cruel. They're not. What is wrong with it is what it does to the species. Selection, and of course, the classic outstanding example of this, not to bandy any words, is quarter horses with HYPP and other muscular diseases that are calcium-mediated diseases. That are absolutely, the genes for those are absolutely inheritable, and are if that was cattle, and indeed I'm telling you the literal truth, it is, cattle can get this stuff. They have equivalent genes that produce similar syndromes. Bulls that are detected to have these are slaughtered. Or if you insist on breeding your hypermuscular bull because you happen to like the look of a hypermuscular cow or bull, you can, but they won't register them. Okay, this to not register in our culture is as good as you might as well have slaughtered them, because they have no economic value. Our Americans are absolutely hung on pedigree. And they, in some ways, that's foolish too, and maybe in some other discussion we'll get down to why that is. But the fact that the Quarter Horse Association has allowed these horses to continue breeding has meant that the genes for this are now almost universally distributed among quarter horse bloodlines. There is no bloodline that does not have at least occasional individual with it, and because they trace back in their pedigree to one of these affected base sires. So this is often blamed on Mr. Impressive. In all probability, it goes farther back than that. So he's was a very popular animal, and this also has to do with artificial insemination. The one and only thing that has saved the life of the thoroughbred, because they've been absolutely stupid about inbreeding, and they're blind as bats, and they won't listen. So, okay, frustrates me. It's not my business. I don't own thoroughbreds. You want them to go extinct? Fine with me. But, in case you didn't, you might want to know that when American Pharoah won the Triple Crown a number of years back, if you look at his pedigree, in a 5-generation pedigree, there are 32 ancestors on the page, in the right-hand column. So that the horse, his parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the great-great-grandparents, going back 5 generations. Out of those 32 names, in his pedigree, 17 of them are the same name.
Ouch.
Try that in the Appalachian South, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are we inbred a little bit? And yet I
Yeah.
have people who have a vested interest in that industry, who are pedigree advisors to big-time people who breed expensive thoroughbreds, write into Equus magazine when we publish this and object, saying, that's not how you figure out if they're inbred. Honey, there isn't any other way to figure out if they're inbred. I don't care what mathematical formula you apply or what percentage number you thereby come up with. They're inbred. No animal in nature and particularly not horses. No animal in nature does that. Repeatedly breed to its own daughters over and over and over again. And horses particularly not. Indeed, if you look at the natural biology of the horse as a wild animal, every mechanism you could imagine is at play to keep the sire from covering his own daughters, because they have behaviors that tend to inhibit this, and they have the sire's sons are all kicked out into bachelor herds, and the daughters go off with perhaps with some of the sons, but they also go off with unrelated stallions, which is what's meant to be, and that inhibits any amount of what's called introgression or repeated inbreeding. So we need to remember this when we're breeding domestic horses, if we care to have domestic horses. And that's another reason to pay attention to conformation and function, because what do you have here? So what you're doing by learning how to do conformation is you're learning how to observe, and that teaches you connoisseurship. It teaches you what is good blood stock. What does it look like? How does it function? And can you find it? Where can you find it? Do you have to have $1 million? No. Yeah, big relief. I don't have $1 million either. So I'm teaching it. I love treasure hunting. My mother was an inveterate yard sale tourist, and I grew up with that. And it is fun to go to the yard sale and find a bargain, okay? Or to go to on the TV now, they got those shows where they open up somebody's abandoned storage unit and see what's in there. And if it isn't marijuana plants or 50 pounds of cocaine, what is it? Is it a motorcycle, or is it some books or paintings or trinkets? What is in there? Maybe it's something you could use. And some of it's junk, but some of it's valuable. And in America, we have a terrible problem. And this is where I go back to the point about the pedigree. We're so hung on pedigree. I have seen absolutely gorgeous half-bred studs who were gelded because they were not purebreds. How do you think they did Warmbloods? What do you think a Warmblood is? It's a part-bred horse. That's why it's called, the old name for them wasn't Warmbloods, it was Outblood, half-bloods, because they were part Arab, thanks to Gustav Rau, and later part thoroughbred. And today, the average Warmblood is better than 90% thoroughbred, with a little dash of some other stuff. So, if you're not willing to register horses who can perform, no matter what their genetic background or their pedigree, you're nuts. You're nuts. You're missing wonderful opportunities. So the most neglected breed in North America is the Quayrab. It's a tremendously useful cross, quarter horse cross Arab. They're bred like mules. Any old quarter horse stud on any old Arab mare, or the reverse, and 90% of them come out beautiful. It's an excellent idea. Some other crosses, I'm not so enthused, but that's a very, very good idea. It improves the bone on the quarter horse, who tends to be under-designed, shall we say, and it improves the calmness of mind of the Arab, and takes off that extra hyper vigilance and I won't say spookiness, but Tom used to say horses that were spooky were not sure of themselves. So you might say what the quarter horse is doing is injecting an element of self-confidence, but it makes a good-bodied, appropriately sized horse with sound legs and feet and a good mind. and a better body balance that comes from the Arab than the typical quarter horse, who is balanced back to front downhill. And that comes because the original quarter horse was not a general purpose animal. It was bred for one reason and one reason only, and that was for sprint racing. So to be a successful sprint racer, you need that downhill balance.
Mm-hmm.
And to be any kind of racehorse, you need somewhat of a downhill balance. The shorter the distance over which you want your racehorse to run, the more downhill he'll need to be. Okay, so that point-to-pointers, timber racers, these animals are balanced like dressage horses. They're basically level.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have the classic distance miler, he will be somewhat noticeably downhill, but the quarter horse, the sprinter, will be much even more noticeably downhill.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Quayrab is an excellent cross. So these are good reasons why you need to learn conformation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're teaching us to be treasure hunters, to look for treasure in unlikely places. But
yeah, because your horse is going to die.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to replace him. And you say, I'm not shopping for a horse. Well, maybe not today, but you will. I mean, not we're all addicted to horses, so you're going to have another one.
Yeah. Well, and then the other point that when we were visiting before about the books, the point that I really latched onto was you were also talking about learning how to train and develop your horse that you have within the conformation that they have in the best way. I think that we all want to do right by our horses.
Yes. Well, that's, yeah, of course we do. Not to be too scared about it. I mean, you know, in your very last issue, the most recent issue of Eclectic Horseman, there's a little article in there about being overwhelmed and the girl not feeling confident. The author of that little piece gives 3 good pieces of advice, but I would add one more, which is horses are very resilient. You can't, if you have no intention of hurting your horse, you won't. And furthermore, you really want to get down and be cruel, really get down to it and just whoop the crap out of them. You have to have quite a bit of skill, which most people don't have.
Thankfully, yeah.
Yeah, you want to beat him up? Okay, fine. Can you sit out the bucks? Can you? I bet not. And I don't think you're probably going to risk that. So I don't think you're going to hurt your horse. So quit pussyfooting around and get with it. Ray used to say, you know, and I don't know if you ever heard him say this, but I love this, of course. He says, I don't worry about making a mistake. I'm too busy making new ones. So smile and go at it.
Yeah.
I don't worry about the mistake I just made. I'm going to make another one pretty quick. And you are, because there is no other way to get there. You cannot get there from one success, from one peak experience to the next. It ain't happening. And you know what? One of the articles you and I did some time ago was that thing on mastery, which is pointed out by Mr. Leonard, who wrote the book on that I recommend on mastery. And he says the same thing. If you expect it all to be success, you're not living in a real world, baby. And what will happen is, if you really are in that mindset, the first time you find a setback and it didn't work, or it didn't work out the way you were hoping, or it didn't work immediately, you're liable to give up. Okay, so get out of that mindset. What you've got to say is, okay, I'm going to learn this and I'm going to teach it to myself. No one else is responsible for teaching it to me. Tom used to say, I can't teach you anything, but I can expose you to some things. And that is exactly the proper job of a teacher. The teacher does not stuff it into you. You know that old famous saying about education? It comes from the root term educe, which means to draw out, not stuff in. So my books are indeed full of information. Take them slowly, because there's a surprise on every page. There is so much misinformation permeating the entire magazine opus, and everywhere there is misinformation, and in all the books. And you have to be able to discriminate, but you can't become able to discriminate until you've had some more experience. And the old story that Tom used to tell about the guy with the experience, right? How do you get experience? By having bad experiences. That's how you get good experience. So you have to work at it. You have to learn to sift. So I'm here to give you the tools that make you able to sift information, so that, who was this? Aristophanes? I can't remember who the old Greek guy was who said this, but he said, in the education of young people, if you can teach them not specific facts, not this fact and that fact and the next fact, but if you can teach them good taste, they'll be safe anywhere they go. Right. And so you read my stuff, you're going to soak up the subliminal message, which has to do with having that discriminatory or connoisseurship. That's what's going to happen to you. It's not there as saying, hi, chapter 1, I'm going to teach you how to discriminate. It's not there in the form of, hey, chapter 2 is connoisseurship. That's a side effect, a meta effect, a higher level thing that happens in the consciousness and in the person's soul or spirit, so that afterwards your whole worldview is changed. That's the idea. So I'm involved in a subject that has the capability of doing that. And there are certainly other, let's say we were talking to a crowd of kids that liked math. I happen to hate math, but, I know there are people who like it. And I think there is the same deal, that if you were being taught by Einstein, you know what Einstein said? He said, I can't add my checkbook. That's true. He couldn't do ordinary addition, and is just, you got it wrong all the time. And he could not solve equations particularly well, but he could write equations that expressed concepts. That's the idea. That's what I'm doing.